Well podcast, where we explore the science, stories, and strategies behind living a longer, healthier, and more purposeful life. I am your host, Dr. Jeff Armstrong, joined by my co-host, Corbin Bruton. Let's be honest, most of what we hear about aging today is either driven by fear or profit. We're told we need to hack our biology, optimize every metric, or buy the latest supplement to stay young. We are bombarded with promises from pharmaceutical giants, tech billionaires chasing immortality, and fitness influencers peddling silver bullet solutions. And through it all, one crucial truth gets lost. Aging isn't a problem to be solved, it's a process to be honored. Here at the Aging Well podcast, we're offering an alternative. Our mission is inclusive, not exclusive. We believe aging well is not just for the wealthy, the bio-optimized, or the genetically gifted. It's for all of us. Grounded in spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, and social well-being, as well as the 6 pillars that we often talk about here on this podcast. If you're tired of the noise and looking for a space where science meets soul, where longevity is about more than lifespan, it's about health span, meaning, and connection, you're in the right place. This is not anti-aging. This is pro-living. This is the Aging Well podcast. Aging Well.
Welcome back to our listeners for part 2 of the Aging Well podcast as we dive in to, just great conversation. We're going to pick up right where we left off last week. So, Dr. Armstrong, right where you picked up last week, you were talking about the importance of exercise science and some of the stuff that we were actually missing. What is it, do you think, that we're missing or we're overlooking, and how would you change that if you were in control of all of the exercise scientists?
If I was in control, we'd be teaching the Zercher squat to everybody. Everybody would be doing the Zercher squat. I think, again, it would be putting a little bit more emphasis on strength training and understanding that lifting heavy is important, and it's not detrimental to the health and welfare of an older adult to lift heavy, because heavy is relative. If we want to be pushing strength, again, without causing injury, but be pushing strength as opposed to lifting light weights for high repetitions and calling that strength training. And, keep doing cardio, but, do get people moving as much as possible, and then be doing some higher intensity type of movements in order to promote a maintenance of VO2 max. So it's pretty simple. I don't think I'm really putting great demands on the exercise science field. It's just kind of, let's follow the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid, and get people moving in the right ways, and understand that just because I'm 62 does not mean that I am going to move like a 62-year-old, or hell, I don't even think I move like 50-year-olds. I think, I'm working at trying to kind of break the mold a little bit. Now, there's people that are in far greater shape than me at 60, 70, even 80. Sometimes that's genetics, but sometimes most of the times it's that they've just been living the hell out of life.
Well, also, I think having the primary focus be on just resistance training, some of our listeners are probably asking themselves, why do I need to change my routine right now? And focus primarily on lifting. And I think it just comes down to, it helps with your overall strength, your balance, your stability. All of these are critical and very important for when you start to age or start to hit into that third age zone bracket, or even that 4th age zone bracket.
I would argue it's important in the 2nd as well.
Well, yeah, totally.
Probably even in 1st, so across the lifespan, being able to move effectively and to be able to lift as much as you can. I mean, again, we think of, how important is it for me to be able to deadlift 400, 500 pounds? Well, maybe not the deadlift itself per se, but, can you lift up your grandchild? Can you lift that box that Amazon has delivered? It's like we get dog food delivered now, like on a monthly basis for the 2 dogs. And it's always a big, heavy box because there's always other stuff in it as well. What would if I was older and weaker and that stuff showed up on my porch. Roll the box into the house. I mean, I want to be able to lift it and move it around. I want to be able to function.
Right.
So functionality is really, really, really important when it comes to aging well.
I think functionality also comes down to flexibility as well. And I know for my own personal exercise routines, like I'm really lacking in the flexibility department. And I've always been aware of it, but I'm becoming more involved with the youth recently, like youth groups and stuff like that. And just going around and playing games with the kids and keeping up with their energy level. I have the energy to keep up with their energy level. I've obviously got the strength to like help lift and move the items that we set up for games. But when it comes to flexibility, man, sometimes it's hard to like get all the way to the ground when you're in certain positions, and you're like, man, this is embarrassing. Like I don't feel old at all. Like I feel really youthful. Yeah, I mean, there's certain days where you're a little bit more tight in certain joints, but you just move around and you're good, right? But man, that flexibility aspect that's something. Luckily, I'm catching it now, and I gotta work on it. But yeah, I mean, geez, Louise, range of motion is a great thing, and if you can't do it, then
you better start
focusing on it.
Yeah.
Because I mean, well, you mentioned like carrying groceries in Amazon bags, but we just moved into a new house, and also carrying a wheelbarrow. It's also lifting the cinder blocks. It's also throwing the giant bags of soil or gravel or whatever it is that you're doing, make everything look good. Like I can do all of that. It's just like getting in positions and like having the flexibility to, because when I pick stuff up, I usually just squat down and pick it up, realizing I only have one kind of range of motion. I need to get the whole aspect of it. That was pretty eye-opening.
Yeah.
All right, let's get back to this. Let's get focused.
Sounds good.
So in contrast to high performance models, what does everyday resilience look like through your lens?
Well, I think you kind of touched on that a little bit. I mean, being able to move cinder blocks, move a wheelbarrow, but even beyond that, I would say, some of the important things that we will need to do as we get older is, can we walk up steps? Can we cross the street fast enough that, cars aren't going to be delayed or be hitting us? Can we squat down and get up from the toilet? Can we clean our houses? Can we cook for ourselves? Can we carry the groceries in from the car? And I love carrying as many of those bags as I can. I mean, it's somewhat showing off, but it's, I know that if I don't, then over time, I'm going to be able to carry less and less of it, and it's going to become more and more of a burden. So when we talk about everyday resilience, we're looking at being able to manage the tasks that will enable us to live independently, to function at a level that gives us a life that we want to have, whether it's being able to hike, play with the kids, play with the grandkids, walk the dogs. The list goes on and on. What do you want to accomplish in life? What do you need to be able to do to continue to perform that as we get older? And what do you want to look like when you're 90, 100, 120, whatever your goals might be? I think a lot of people say, if I survive to be 70, I've done well. Well, that's not the case anymore. If you're enjoying the Aging Well podcast, be sure to like, subscribe, or follow on your favorite platform so you will never miss an episode. And if you find our conversations helpful, please share the podcast with a friend, because aging is something we're all doing, and we're better at doing it together. And support our guests in this podcast financially by visiting the affiliate links in the episode description below, and use the links or codes provided for discounts on products we have vetted and feel comfortable recommending to our valued viewers and listeners. Thank you, and now back to the podcast.
And that's really, that could be a really hard pill for people to swallow, because, but you're right. You're totally right. Because if you think about it, we in a Western society, our retirement age is 63. That's the age that is recommended for someone to retire. But I know I work with a lot of individuals where they're way past 63. They're in their 70s and they're still working. I worked with one lady and she was in her 90s actually, and she was just like, I'm just moving along. And I'm not here to throw anyone's laundry out on why they didn't retire, or maybe they were finding that purpose that they wanted. Maybe it was, the stock market crash of 2008. Maybe they're trying to rebuild. I don't know. But what I do know is, let's just use that model of retiring at 63. If someone's like, oh, I lived until 74, I'm good. That's only 11 years of enjoying your retirement, if you really think about it. Because if they're like, well, I lived for 74, it's time to go, that's not cool. Like, make your life worth living, make it count, and give meaning and give purpose and create memories, and use as much of your life adequately to experience everything needed. Am I wrong in saying that?
No, absolutely. I mean, to me, I don't want to ever retire. I don't think anybody should feel like they have to retire or they've failed in life if they don't retire at 63.
Totally.
I know there's financial reasons why many of us will have to work a lot longer. But, to me, it's more about productivity and being useful and, having something to do every day. I can't imagine getting up in the morning and like, okay, what am I going to do today? Well, let's see what's on TV. Or, okay, I'll take a walk around the neighborhood. That took 40 minutes. Now what do I do? I want to be productive and I want to be active and all those types of things. So people are going to make different choices. If you really love to travel and all that, and hopefully you're financially prepared that you can, retire at 63 or younger and get out there and do stuff, and spend that money that you've worked hard to earn. But the key to, just living well is to be able to live well and with vitality at whatever you choose to do in your growing years.
So, Dr. Armstrong, we hear a lot about extending lifespans, but you stress health span and even meaning span. So what's the difference and why does it even matter?
Well, I think, when we look at lifespan really hasn't dramatically changed in the human species. I mean, we can live to a certain age and that's pretty normal. But health span relates to how healthy or how well we are living those years. And so there's really efforts to, when we talk about, lifespan or longevity, we're not going to do a whole heck of a lot to extend how long people can live. But we can improve how healthy they can be in that period of time, and so pushing up the health span age, so the period of time, that third age before we hit into fourth age, keeping that as long as possible and as close to the lifespan as possible is what we're talking about when we stress health span. I think the meaning span comes to, when we talk about well-centered fitness and the SPIES model, it's having meaning and purpose in all those years as well. Because, okay, we can live healthy, we can live long, but to live without meaning, what's the purpose of the point, right? And so I would probably even emphasize we need to start looking at, rather than lifespan, health span, well span, how well are we living? Are we living that SPIES model to the fullest and getting, closer and closer to that asymptote as we age? And getting better, be our best today, be better tomorrow is one of my mantras. That's what we're really looking at meaning span or well span, and not only living longer, but living with greater purpose or finding that purpose as we age.
So would you say that in order to extend someone's lifespan, focusing on spiritual and social wellness is just as critical as physical health when it comes to aging well?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, again, I don't think we're going to change the lifespan, but, health is closely tied to the spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, and social. You look at, the physical being our genetics, things that we're doing, exercise, diet, and all those. Spiritual brings purpose into the whole equation. and, living for something greater than oneself. The more educated we are, so the intellectual piece, the longer people tend to live and the better health they have throughout their lifespan. And, emotional, I mean, we are in a society where emotional well-being has fallen apart. There's so much anxiety, so much stress, so much fear, all those types of things, so much hatred, so much bitterness. There's so much impacting us emotionally that has a negative toll on our health. And then, of course, we've talked about the role of social connection in wealth span and health span and so on. So all of that is connected. And so I don't think you can separate the well-centered fitness from health span and lifespan.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned that. We're kind of in a mental health crisis right now. And I think that statement alone weighs way more heavier on answering the question I asked. And hopefully, yeah, when we first started this podcast, we weren't just, yes, we spoke about the physical exercise and nutrition because that's what we knew about, but it wasn't the main goal. The goal was to also help individuals age mentally, emotionally, spiritually, like even financially at one point, right? And so, man, I'm really glad that you touched on that. You said that aging well is inclusive, not elite. Can you share what that looks like in practice?
Yeah, and I think it's keeping it simple, and trying to give access to everybody. It's very easy for us to say, okay, you want to age well, you got to exercise, you got to eat right, you got to maintain a healthy body composition, not smoke, get good sleep hygiene, and have good social connections or purposeful social connections. Now go do it. And expect people to be able to do it. And without the proper tools, the education, without the proper environment, it's impossible. And so we have, we've talked about not having the front porch. We're constructing houses. We're putting people in conditions where it's just harder and harder to socially connect and interact. We make it harder to engage in exercise. People maybe can't afford a gym. There's not as much outdoor space to be able to move around, to go walking, walk the dogs in safe neighborhoods and those types of things. Food access. I mean, you want to talk about how badly we have affected people's nutrition. I mean, grocery stores push the crappiest of foods. There's more and more fast food restaurants growing, fewer healthy restaurants, fewer grocery stores, people having to buy food at convenience stores. You have, when we look at food assistance programs, they don't make it easy for people to get healthy food and don't even make it possible for people to fully understand what is healthy food. And so there's just so many factors that are keeping people from being able to age well. And then we have, these billionaire biohackers telling us, that they're going to live forever because they're spending millions of dollars. That's elitism. You're basically looking at, okay, what are the things that are going to allow the most elite of us to be able to live well? And the rest of you are just going to have to suffer through because you didn't make the right financial decisions to be able to age well.
So you're basically summarizing it that aging well is affordable.
It can be, yes. And, it just needs to be accessible. And we have to provide access to people. And I think that's what separates the Aging Well podcast from other podcasts is that we're trying to promote what can you do? What are the baby steps that you can take today to live a healthier, more vital life tomorrow? And it's not anything that's that difficult. And I'm not going to sit on this podcast and promote, tons and tons. And there may very well be supplements or treatments that we can do that can extend the lifespan, but that's not accessible to the majority of people. So what can we do to better the lives of all people across the globe so that they can live healthier, longer, and more productive lives?
Yeah. Give an example. Just one. Someone's listening to this right now and they're like, okay, what's my first baby step? What can I do? Go.
I mean, there's so many first baby steps you can do. I mean, which pillar do we want to look at? If we want to look at exercise and physical activity, okay, what can you take one step right now that you didn't take yesterday? If we talk about 10,000 steps, well, if you're at 500 steps because you barely get off the couch, get up, take a couple steps. Just doing something, moving around a little bit is going to be more than you've done yesterday. And then just do a little bit more tomorrow. A little bit more. If what is it? Confucius said, the longest journey starts with a single step, I believe is the quote.
Wow.
So, not all of us are going to run a marathon, but, if you decide you want to run a marathon and you've never run a marathon and you're totally out of shape and you're 50 pounds overweight, well, go walk around the block. It might be a struggle to get around that block, but you walk around that block today, tomorrow you might get a little further and a little bit further. And you just keep moving a little bit more. When we look at diet, what's one small change that we can make today that can impact the number of calories we're putting in our bodies?
Right.
I use the example all the time in my classes that if you drink sugared pop or soda, for those people that speak incorrectly, a 20-ounce bottle of pop is about 260 calories. So if you cut one of those a day, I forget off the top of my head how many calories that adds up to, and anybody can do the math. It's 365 times 260. But I remember, because I just did it recently in class, that it came out to about 16 and 2/3 pounds over the course of the year that you would gain if you increased that caloric intake, or you would lose if you decreased that. So if you simply stop drinking that one pop a day, that one 20-ounce pop, you can prevent yourself from gaining 16 pounds or lose 16 pounds if you go in a caloric deficit. So, I mean, that's a simple step. A little less unhealthy fats, eat a little bit more, eat one stalk of broccoli today that you didn't eat yesterday. That's a step in the right direction. Changing, your food intake a little bit more, eating a little bit more protein if you're not eating enough protein, eating a little less if you're eating too much protein. It's just baby steps. So what about Bob?
Right.
Like, what am I trying to do? Okay, well, what's the first step I need to take to move in that direction?
So basically, I'm hearing, park farther away from the store to get your steps in. Don't necessarily utilize the elevator or escalator all the time. Take advantage of those stairs. If you're eating crummy, throw in some veggies in there. Add protein. Focus on protein, just real simple stuff.
Yeah.
Long story short, don't complicate it.
Right. It doesn't have to be complicated. And that's, again, why I want this to be the Aging Well podcast. We're getting rid of the complicatedness. We're simplifying the process of aging well. And it's not going to be about, okay, this is the expensive supplement you have to take, and it's going to cost you, I forget what, but I'm trying to remember now the supplement that wealthy longevity quote unquote expert. People couldn't see my air quotes if you're listening, but the supplement's like $360 some odd a day. I think it's well over $300 not a day, but a month. Most people can't afford that,
right?
And that's only a partial part of what he's taking. So. What are the simple things that we can do to make our quality of life better?
Yeah. I mean, I think that question is for the individual themselves, really. What do they want out of their life? If they took their life and they could squeeze as much awesomeness and produce as much of it as they can, what does that look like? What steps do they need to take? And I think if you're listening to this right now, you got to ask yourself that, and what goals are you going to be setting in order to accomplish that?
And if you don't know what steps to take to accomplish that, don't tune into this podcast, because that's our goal. And if we're not talking about it and you have a question, send us the question and we'll talk about it on this podcast. Yeah. That's our goal and purpose with this podcast, is to educate and to inspire.
So let's say we do have an individual who's just, they're like, I just don't know. I just don't have the time. I don't have the money. I don't have access. What do you say to a person who feels left behind by modern longevity?
Quote a person from Brooklyn, forget about it.
Forget about it.
You don't have to chase after these health upgrades. It's the small decisions that we're making, and longevity science. There's some good science out there, but it's very incomplete. And so understand that most of what you're being fed is either from influencers on social media or people who kind of have a product to sell or an agenda to sell. There's very few that are really diving into the science that is benefiting true longevity. And again, if you really want to kind of get deeper into the science, if you're that science minded, I would encourage people to watch the OptiSpan podcast with Matt Caberline. I think he gives some really good, solid information. He's not one that will really push the hacks before pushing the lifestyle changes. And so if you don't have the money or you don't feel like you have the money, well, what can you do with the budget that you have? And what doesn't cost as much money? Because most of this, and look at the people in the blue zones. If you interview anybody in any of the blue zones across the globe, none of them are going to be, if you ask them, well, what helped you live so long? They're not going to start listing out all the supplements and the biohacks that they've been taking over the course of their lifespan. They're going to tell you're going to see it's the social connections, it's the physical activity that they're doing, the healthy foods that they're eating that are giving them that longevity. So it doesn't take a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of, access to these things to be able to be healthy. It's just kind of get out there and do it. Make the changes, evaluate your current situation and what can you do in small increments to make it better tomorrow.
Oh, nailed it. What does well-centered fitness mean, and how does it push back against the no pain, no gain mentality?
I'm glad you asked that. Now, well-centered fitness is really kind of a concept that I've labeled. It's nothing new. It's just my label to the wellness. It's really kind of the SPIES model, how I label it. So well-centered just indicates that there's that balance. When we look at wellness in general, most are going to present it as kind of a pie where, the spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, social, sometimes they put environmental in that. They all are kind of even pieces of the pie. And I take a different approach to that. I tend to feel that the spiritual and the physical really are more of the base of a pyramid. And then we build on top of that. You build your intellectual out, feeds our kind of ability to understand our emotions, and emotions feed into the spirit, this social, and then everything kind of feeds back to the physical and spiritual. And so it's this constantly kind of growing, expanding pyramid, but it's all based around an asymptote that, you have this asymptote of perfection. And for those who don't remember their high school math, an asymptote is that line that the graph never quite hits. We always keep approaching it. We get closer and closer, but we never get right on that line. And so think of well-centered fitness being a target, and the bullseye keeps getting smaller and smaller. We're still hitting the bullseye. It becomes a little bit more difficult to hit the bullseye perfectly, but it's challenging us to get closer and closer to perfection, but we're never going to actually get to perfection. And so well-centered fitness is really balancing those areas, looking at the areas where we have some deficiency and how can we improve those and maintain the other areas. And we're constantly going to be kind of shifting around in those different areas. Some days are going to be better physically. Some days might be better spiritually. We have good days and bad days in our social connections. But that is kind of what the well-centered fitness model is all about, how it pushes against the no pain, no gain mentality. I'm kind of mixed on that. I mean, the no pain, no gain, it generally tells us that, it has to hurt in order to get better, to make it. And we don't always have to have negative stressors in our lives to make us get better. Sometimes the positives can fuel our spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, and social growth as well. But there does have to be a certain level of agitation, to stress on a system in order for it to adapt. And so no pain, no gain, I think takes it over the top a little bit. We always have that mentality in the bro gym, it's no pain, no gain, dude. But we need to have a little bit of pressure on ourselves, on the system, in order for it to adapt. But it doesn't have to be hurtful. So I don't know that it pushes back against it, but doesn't necessarily encourage it either. I think when we're talking about well-centered, it's just really making positive approaches towards improvement in those areas of the SPIES model. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I think there's a difference between pain as in this hurts in my joints and my ligaments versus my muscles are burning though. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I think being in tune and being aware of your body, if just speaking on a physical aspect of it, getting uncomfortable, being uncomfortable helps you grow. And I don't think it's just physical. I think it's mental. I think it's emotional. I mean, you probably have college students where you are giving them assignments and it's mentally challenging for them. And some of them are like, oh my gosh, I just feel like I'm just going to burn out. This is so tough. But then there's probably others where they're like, you know what? This is a challenge, but it's just making me smarter. It's making me stronger. I'm obtaining, mental strength as I'm getting it. So I think, what, the old saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. What doesn't break down your muscle to the point where it can't build itself back up. I think it could be good for you. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. you gotta build yourself back up. You get knocked off that horse, get back on. But with that being said, though, don't open yourself up to severe injury.
Yeah, and you're focusing on the physical. I think, the whole point of well-centered fitness is, and I'm an exercise physiologist, so the principles of adaptation, the specificity, the overload principle, progression, reversibility, individuality, all those apply to the spiritual, the physical, intellectual, and emotional, and social as we are attempting to improve in those areas. And so everybody's going to adapt a little bit differently. Everybody's going to need a little bit more stress than others. We can't overdo certain areas because it's going to always work to the detriment of other areas. If I focus too much on the spiritual, I'm neglecting my spiritual health, my physical health. My intellectual might kind of coincide with that spiritual development. But, say you're, somebody that all they do is, they're on their knees praying 24/7. Well, that's not healthy from a physical standpoint. You're not really growing maybe in your intellect, whether it's, even understanding of your religious principles and, spiritual principles. Emotionally, you're not engaged with anything other than that one issue of praying. And then you're not interacting with people socially. So there's good and bad with all this stuff, but we can overdo certain areas and underdo other areas. And it's kind of where I always talk about opportunity cost. We have a certain amount of time in a day to do the things that we need to do. When we're looking at being well-centered, we want to be as much balanced across all of those different components or dimensions as much as possible.
Gotcha. I think this is a good segue. So you often talk about being more human, not more optimized. So what does that mean?
Well, I think, we got to be realistic. We got to be people, and again, it goes back to the whole biohacking and some of the longevity community that it's all about optimizing your health, and you have to be, strongest physically, or you have to have the best, running time, or, the least amount of fat on your body and most amount of muscle mass. We have to be human first. We're not machines. We're not fine tuning a machine to perform. We are growing and this is where I think where it kind of dovetails with my We Have a Spiritual Problem podcast is, I tend to favor the approach to hard that we are in a spiritual evolution, that we are growing to be more complex and more unified as a human species. And it's not about optimization. It's about just becoming more human. And it's really kind of hard to narrow down into just one or two sentence response. But I think that's hopefully something we'll be underscoring across this podcast is that, again, it's not about optimizing our scores, not getting better numbers. It's about being better humans, being better people so that we're more functional, being able to be more purposeful, being able to be more vital to our societies.
So what exactly does that look like, though? You know what I mean? Because that could be, I guess, different societies, different cultures, different demographics, just within America alone, right? Just within our own state of Oregon, the Willamette Valley is going to be way different than Central Oregon, which is going to be way different than the Rogue Valley down in Southern Oregon, which is going to be different than the Wallowas in the northeastern portion of Oregon. And so what does that look like exactly with so much diversity and differences?
Well, what's common about all of us? We're human, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's that finding that commonality. You mentioned earlier, if I cut myself, do I not bleed? I think was the quote you used.
I just said when I cut, it just
maybe that's what I was thinking of. Yeah, and that's at that point I was thinking that whole quote. If I cut myself, do I not bleed? Well, that's the same thing. So whatever aspect of the individual, what your demographics are, what your ethnicity is, what your gender is, what your age is, the core of it all, we're all human. And, we all have, I think it's, what is it? Like it's more than 90% of our genetic code is identical. So we're more the same than we are different. And so, it's more important to be looking at what makes us human than what optimizes us in our performance.
Gotcha. Well, as we launch or relaunch the Aging Well podcast, what do you hope our listeners come away with week after week?
Well, I hope, a lot of just what we've been talking about over these 2 episodes is, that you can age well, that it's not out of the reach of anybody, that we just have to take those small baby steps on a daily basis. And what can we improve today that's going to make us better tomorrow? And, just keep at it. And, don't feel shamed if you're not aging as well as somebody else, but what can you do to age better? And, don't feel superior because you can afford things that others can't afford that, affords you the opportunity to theoretically age better, and share in this experience that, again, we're human, and it's an experience to be shared. And I think if we're going to be effective in this podcast, we're going to turn people away from the biohackers, from the influencers, from the pharmaceutical companies. We're going to change the face of Western medicine so that, people are getting well instead of just getting their symptoms treated. And, just do your best today, do better tomorrow.
So basically, to summarize everything, whether we're wishing our listeners good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, we're just hoping that they have a good day, right? If they're about to embark on this journey and they don't know what to do with that first step, we recommend having a baby step, right? Very first approach is that baby step. In order to build a solid foundation of a fitness lifestyle, we recommend that they build that foundation using 6 solid pillars of overall well-being. And would you like to add anything else to this?
Just keep tuning in, hit that like button, if depending on the platform you're on, follow or subscribe so that you're going to get all the updates as we bring more and more information out, as we have interviews on a weekly basis, working at aging well.
Aging well. And then also another thing, we also do encourage the listeners to get involved. If you have any questions or there's a subject that you want us to dive into, feel free to notify us. Dr. Armstrong does put the link to our email in the description. So feel free to reach out to us on any subjects that you might have, any questions that you might have, any new literature that's out there that you'd like us to dive into. Do that. We want to help you with your journey as far as aging well. And we just want you to carpe momento, seize the moment, and age well.
Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.